The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her tactical vest one last time. At 26, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that seemed to emphasize just how small she looked among the towering figures surrounding her. The other candidates moved with the confidence of men who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. Sarah had spent hers proving she belonged anywhere she wasn't wanted. The selection process for the elite counterterrorism unit had already claimed half the original candidates. What remained was a group of hardened military professionals, each one handpicked from special forces units across the country. Sarah was the only woman who had made it this far, a fact that wasn't lost on anyone present, especially the Navy SEALs who made up the majority of the remaining candidates. "Look at her," whispered Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison to his teammate, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "She's gonna get someone killed when the real shooting starts." His words carried the weight of years in combat zones, the authority of someone who had earned his place through blood and brotherhood. The other SEALs nodded in agreement, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Sarah had heard it all before. During her time as an Army Ranger, she had faced the same doubts, the same whispered conversations, the same assumption that her presence somehow diminished the unit's effectiveness. She had learned to let the words bounce off her like bullets off armor plating. But today felt different. Today was the final evaluation, the test that would determine who joined the most elite counterterrorism unit in the country. The training facility sprawled across 30 acres of carefully designed obstacles, buildings, and scenarios. It was meant to simulate every possible combat situation, from urban warfare to hostage rescue. Sarah had excelled in every phase of training so far, often outperforming candidates who had twice her experience and 3 times her size. Her marksmanship scores were consistently in the top 3. Her tactical knowledge was flawless. Her physical endurance had surprised even the instructors. But none of that seemed to matter to the SEALs who would potentially become her teammates. They saw only what they wanted to see: a liability dressed in military fatigues, a weak link that would compromise their sacred brotherhood. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that these men, trained to adapt to any situation, seemed incapable of adapting to the idea of a female operator. Captain Reynolds, the unit commander, called the remaining candidates to attention. His weathered face showed no emotion as he surveyed the group. 20 years of special operations had taught him to measure people by their actions, not their appearance. Sarah had caught his attention early in the selection process, not because she was different, but because she was effective. "Today's exercise is simple," Reynolds announced, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "We have a hostage situation. Terrorists have taken control of a 3-story building. Intelligence suggests they have at least 6 civilians held on the top floor. Your mission is to neutralize the threats and extract the hostages. You'll be divided into teams of 4. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Reynolds began calling out team assignments. She had hoped to be paired with some of the other Army Rangers or Marine Force recon operators who had at least worked with women before. Instead, she found herself assigned to Alpha Team with Morrison and 2 of his SEAL teammates, Petty Officer Richards and Petty Officer Thompson. The 3 men exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their feelings regarding their new team member. "Great," Morrison muttered under his breath. "Babysitting duty." The briefing room was filled with detailed floor plans, intelligence reports, and surveillance photos. The scenario was designed to test every aspect of their training: tactical planning, communication, adaptability, and execution under pressure. Sarah studied the building layout with the intensity of someone whose life depended on memorizing every detail, because in the real world it would. The target building was a converted office complex with multiple entry points, narrow corridors, and plenty of places for defenders to set up ambushes. The hostages were reportedly being held in a conference room on the 3rd floor, while the terrorists had established defensive positions throughout the building. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes situation the unit would face in the field. As Alpha Team huddled around their assigned table to plan their approach, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Morrison spread out the floor plans and immediately began outlining his strategy, barely glancing at Sarah as he spoke. His plan was solid but conventional: a frontal assault up the main stairwell while Richards provided overwatch from an adjacent building. "What about the service elevator?" Sarah asked, pointing to a small notation on the blueprint. If we can access it from the basement, we could bypass their main defensive positions and— We're not changing the plan. Morrison cut her off. This isn't the time for creative thinking. We stick to proven tactics. Thompson nodded in agreement. She's right though, Chief. That elevator could be a good alternate route if things go sideways. Morrison's jaw tightened. The plan stands. We breach the front entrance, clear each floor systematically, and extract the hostages. No heroics, no improvisation, just solid teamwork. Sarah bit back her response. She had seen this attitude before. The rigid thinking that came from too much success using the same methods. It worked until it didn't, and when it failed, people died. But she was the outsider here, the one who had to prove herself worthy of their trust and respect. The equipment check was routine but thorough. Each team member verified their weapons, communication gear, and protective equipment. Sarah's movements were efficient and practiced, the result of countless hours of training and actual combat experience. She had learned long ago that competence was the only language that some people understood. As they prepared to move to the starting position, Reynolds appeared at their table. His eyes swept over the team, lingering for a moment on Sarah before addressing Morrison. Your team has a reputation for flawless execution, Chief. Don't let anything compromise that today. The message was clear, though unspoken. Morrison nodded stiffly. Understood, sir. We'll get the job done. Sarah checked her gear one final time as they moved toward the staging area. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her like a physical force. Every mistake would be magnified, every success minimized. It was a burden she had carried her entire military career, but today it felt heavier than usual. The building loomed ahead of them, its windows dark and threatening. Somewhere inside, actors playing terrorists waited to test their skills. Somewhere else, actors playing hostages depended on their success. It was as close to real combat as training could provide, and Sarah knew that her performance in the next hour would determine whether she finally gained the respect she had spent years earning, or whether she would be dismissed as just another failed experiment in military integration. The approach to the target building was executed with military precision. Alpha Team moved in a diamond formation, with Morrison taking point and Sarah assigned to the rear position. It was a deliberate placement, she knew, designed to keep her out of the primary action rather than because of any tactical advantage. The message was clear: watch and learn, but don't get in the way. The morning air was crisp as they covered the final 100 meters to the building's perimeter. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear the chatter from the other teams as they moved into their assigned positions. Bravo Team was setting up overwatch positions in the adjacent parking structure. Charlie Team was preparing to breach through the building's rear entrance. Each team moved with the coordinated efficiency that came from years of training and real-world experience. Morrison raised his fist, signaling a halt as they reached the building's front entrance. The glass doors were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. According to the intelligence briefing, the terrorists had posted sentries on the first floor and had likely booby-trapped the main entrances. Sarah studied the building's facade, noting the architectural details that hadn't been clearly visible in the floor plans. Control, this is Alpha Team. Morrison spoke quietly into his microphone. We're in position at the primary entrance, requesting permission to breach. Alpha Team, you are cleared for entry, came the response from the command center. All teams are in position and ready to execute on your signal. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat. Even though this was a training exercise, her body couldn't distinguish between simulated danger and the real thing. Years of actual combat had conditioned her nervous system to prepare for violence the moment tactical operations began. Richards appeared at Morrison's shoulder, having circled around from the building's east side. I've got eyes on 2 sentries through the ground floor windows, he whispered. They're positioned to cover the main entrance, but there's a blind spot near the reception desk. Morrison nodded and began hand signaling the entry sequence. It was textbook special operations doctrine. Flashbang through the front entrance, immediate suppression of known threats, then systematic clearing of each room. Sarah had executed similar breaches dozens of times during her deployment in Afghanistan, but she remained silent, following Morrison's lead despite her growing concerns about their approach. The plan had a critical flaw that none of the SEALs seemed to recognize. The building's layout created a fatal funnel at the main entrance, forcing them to bunch up in the lobby where they would be vulnerable to crossfire from the mezzanine level. Sarah had noted this during the briefing. but her suggestion for an alternate approach had been dismissed. Now, as they prepared to execute Morrison's plan, she could see the tactical disaster unfolding before it even began. 30 seconds, Morrison announced, pulling the pin on a flashbang grenade. The other team members tensed, weapons ready, eyes focused on the dark glass doors that stood between them and the simulated terrorists inside. Sarah made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of following Morrison through the front entrance, she broke formation and sprinted toward the service entrance she had identified during the planning phase. It was a violation of orders, a breach of protocol that could result in her immediate dismissal from the program, but it was also the right tactical decision, and Sarah had learned long ago to trust her instincts over politics. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing?" Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece as she reached the service door. "Providing alternate entry," she responded, testing the door handle. It was unlocked, just as she had suspected. The exercise designers had created multiple entry points but expected the teams to use only the obvious ones. "I can flank their defensive positions while you execute the primary breach." "Negative. Return to your assigned position immediately." Sarah ignored the order and slipped through the service door into the building's utility corridor. The space was narrow and dimly lit, exactly the kind of environment where her smaller size became an advantage rather than a liability. She could move quickly and quietly through spaces that would slow down larger operators. The sound of the flashbang detonating echoed through the building as Morrison's team executed their breach. Sarah used the distraction to move deeper into the building, following the utility corridor toward the main lobby. Through the thin walls, she could hear simulated gunfire and shouted commands as Alpha Team engaged the defending actors. Her earpiece erupted with urgent communications. "Alpha Team taking heavy fire in the lobby. We need immediate backup. 2 operators down." Richard's voice was strained. "We're pinned behind the reception desk." Sarah reached a junction in the utility corridor that provided access to the building's main electrical and HVAC systems. More importantly, it offered a direct route to the mezzanine level where the defenders had established their overwatch position. She could hear movement above her head, boots on metal flooring, voices coordinating defensive fires. "Control, this is Martinez," she whispered into her microphone. "I'm in position to neutralize the mezzanine threat. Request permission to engage." "Martinez, return to your team immediately," came Captain Reynolds' voice. "You are operating outside of assigned parameters." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Morrison's team struggling with exactly the tactical problems she had anticipated. They were trapped in the lobby, unable to advance or retreat, while the defenders rained simulated fire down from their elevated positions. In a real combat situation, the entire team would be dead or seriously wounded by now. Sarah climbed through an access hatch into the building's HVAC system. The ductwork was cramped and uncomfortable, but it provided concealed movement to anywhere in the building. She had studied the building plans carefully enough to know that the main air handler was located directly beneath the conference room, where the hostages were being held. If she could reach that position, she could bypass all of the building's defensive positions and strike directly at the heart of the problem. "Alpha Team, status report," Reynolds' voice demanded through the radio. "We're combat ineffective," Morrison admitted. "Lost 2 operators and we can't advance past the lobby. The mezzanine position has us completely suppressed." Sarah emerged from the ductwork on the second floor behind the terrorist positions. Through the floor plans, she knew that the stairwell to the 3rd floor was only 20 meters away. The defending actors were focused on the firefight in the lobby below, unaware that their rear positions had been compromised. She moved through the 2nd floor with the fluid precision of someone who had cleared hundreds of buildings in actual combat. Each corner was checked, each room cleared with minimal noise and maximum efficiency. Her training had taught her that speed and surprise were more valuable than firepower. In close-quarters combat, the sound of footsteps on the stairwell above told her that the terrorists were moving hostages between floors, possibly in response to the assault in the lobby. This was exactly the kind of dynamic situation that required immediate adaptation, the kind of thinking that couldn't be planned in advance or executed by following rigid protocols. "Control. I have movement on the 3rd floor," Sarah reported. "Hostages may be in transit. I'm moving to intercept." "Martinez, abort your current position and return to your team," Reynolds ordered. Sarah reached the base of the stairwell leading to the third floor. Above her, she could hear at least 3 different voices, plus what sounded like hostages being moved between rooms. The situation was fluid and dangerous. Exactly the kind of scenario that separated elite operators from conventional soldiers. She had seconds to make a decision that would determine the outcome of the exercise and quite possibly her entire military career. Sarah pressed her back against the stairwell wall, controlling her breathing as she listened to the activity above. 3 distinct male voices were coordinating movement, their words muffled but urgent. The sound of furniture being dragged across the floor suggested they were repositioning barricades. Most concerning was the whimpering she could hear from what were obviously the hostage actors, their fear genuine even in this simulated environment. Through her earpiece, the situation in the lobby continued to deteriorate. Morrison's team was completely stalled, unable to advance beyond the reception area without taking casualties that would end the exercise. The mezzanine shooters had them pinned down, and every attempt to move forward resulted in simulated hits from the laser training systems built into their equipment. Alpha Team, we need you to break contact and regroup. Captain Reynolds' voice carried a note of frustration. Exercise parameters require tactical withdrawal if casualties exceed 50%. Negative, Control, Morrison responded. We can still complete the mission, just need a few more minutes to find an alternate route. Sarah knew there was no alternate route from their position. The building's design funneled all ground floor movement through the lobby, and the defenders had established perfect fields of fire to cover every approach. Morrison's stubborn refusal to adapt was going to result in mission failure, exactly the kind of rigid thinking that got people killed in real combat situations. She began moving up the stairwell, each step calculated to minimize noise. Her small frame allowed her to stay close to the wall where the steps were less likely to creak under her weight. Years of moving through hostile buildings had taught her that sound discipline was often more important than speed in close-quarters operations. The third-floor layout was burned into her, memory from hours studying the building plans. The hostages were being held in Conference Room C, a large space with windows overlooking the parking lot. The terrorists had likely chosen it because it provided them with good visibility of approaching forces and multiple escape routes if the situation went bad. What they hadn't counted on was someone approaching from an unexpected direction. Sarah reached the top of the stairwell and paused to assess the situation. The hallway extended 30 meters in both directions, with Conference Room C located at the far end of the left corridor. She could see movement through the frosted glass windows of several offices, suggesting that the defenders had positioned themselves to cover the main approaches to the hostage location. Movement on the east stairwell, one of the terrorist actors called out. Looks like they're trying to flank us. Sarah realized they were referring to Charlie Team's approach from the rear of the building. The timing was perfect. While the defenders repositioned to meet that threat, she would have a clear path to the hostage room. But she had to move immediately, before they realized their rear was completely exposed. She sprinted down the left corridor, staying low and using the office doorways for concealment. Her movement was fluid and silent, the result of countless hours of CQB training where every step had to be perfect. Behind her, she could hear the defenders moving toward the east side of the building to counter Charlie Team's advance. Conference Room C was protected by a heavy wooden door with a small window that had been covered with paper from the inside. Sarah could hear voices beyond the door but couldn't determine how many terrorists were inside, or exactly where the hostages were positioned. This was the moment where training met reality, where all the classroom instruction had to be translated into split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission, success, and catastrophic failure. She positioned herself beside the door and spoke quietly into her microphone. "Control, this is Martinez. I'm in position outside the hostage room. Request permission to breach." "Martinez, maintain your position," Reynolds responded immediately. "You are not authorized to initiate contact without team support." Through the door, Sarah could hear one of the terrorist actors speaking on what sounded like a radio. "Base, this is Tango 3. We've got multiple teams approaching our position. Recommend we execute Contingency Plan Alpha." Sarah's blood ran cold. Contingency Plan Alpha was exercise terminology for killing the hostages and attempting to escape. In a real situation, this would be the moment where hesitation meant innocent people died. The exercise was designed to test exactly this kind of decision-making under pressure. Control, hostile actors are discussing hostage elimination, Sarah reported. I need immediate clearance to breach. Negative, Martinez. Wait for team support. But Sarah knew that team support wasn't coming. Morrison's team was still pinned down in the lobby. Charlie team was engaged with defenders on the east side of the building, and Bravo team was providing overwatch from outside the building. She was the only operator in position to prevent the simulated execution of 6 innocent civilians. She made the decision that would define the rest of her career. Sarah pulled a flashbang from her vest and positioned herself to breach the door. The technique she was about to execute was one she had used successfully in Afghanistan, but never in training with this unit. It required perfect timing, flawless execution, and a little bit of luck. Most importantly, it required absolute confidence in her own abilities. Martinez, do not breach that door. Reynolds' voice was sharp with authority. Sarah pulled the pin on the flashbang and kicked the door open in one fluid motion. The grenade bounced off the far wall and detonated just as she rolled through the doorway. Her weapon already aimed at the first target she had identified through the gap beneath the door. The room erupted in chaos. 3 terrorist actors were positioned around a conference table, where 6 civilian actors sat with their hands bound behind their backs. The flashbang had done its job, temporarily blinding and disorienting the defenders. Sarah's first shot tagged the terrorists closest to the hostages, her laser training system registering a clean hit to center mass. The second terrorist was turning toward her, his weapon coming up, when Sarah's second shot caught him in the chest. Her muscle memory took over, years of combat experience guiding her movements as she acquired the third target. He was diving for cover behind an overturned table, but Sarah's angle from the doorway gave her a clear shot. Her third round found its mark just as he reached concealment. Room clear, Sarah called out, though she continued scanning for additional threats. 6 hostages secure, 3 hostiles neutralized. The silence that followed was deafening. Through her earpiece, she could hear the stunned reactions from the other teams and the command center. In less than 30 seconds, she had accomplished what the entire exercise had been designed to test: the successful rescue of hostages from a fortified position. Martinez, report your status, Captain Reynolds' voice was carefully controlled. All hostages are secure and unharmed, Sarah responded, moving to check on the civilian actors. Conference room C is clear and ready for extraction. One of the hostage actors, a middle-aged woman who worked as a contractor for the training facility, looked up at Sarah with genuine admiration. That was incredible, she whispered. I've been doing these exercises for 5 years and I've never seen anything like that. Sarah helped the woman to her feet, her mind already shifting to the next phase of the operation. The hostages were secure, but they still needed to be evacuated from the building. The exercise wasn't over until every civilian was safely outside the building and accounted for. Control, I need an extraction route for 6 civilians, Sarah reported. Building is not fully secure and I cannot guarantee safe passage through the primary routes. Through the conference room windows, she could see the parking lot where emergency vehicles waited to transport the freed hostages. But between their current position and safety lay 3 floors of partially cleared building, with unknown numbers of hostile actors still in play. The radio crackled with activity as the other teams reported their status and began coordinating the extraction phase. But Sarah knew that her unauthorized breach had changed everything about the exercise, and possibly everything about her future with the unit. The aftermath of Sarah's breach sent shockwaves through the entire training exercise. In the command center, Captain Reynolds stared at the tactical display showing Alpha Team's position, his experienced mind racing through the implications of what had just occurred. A single operator had accomplished in 30 seconds what the entire coordinated assault had failed to achieve in 20 minutes. All teams, hold your positions, Reynolds commanded through the radio. Exercise is temporarily suspended for tactical assessment. Sarah maintained her position in Conference Room C, keeping watch over the 6 hostage actors while monitoring radio traffic from the other teams. Through the windows, she could see the evaluators gathering in the parking lot, their animated discussions visible even from the 3rd floor. She knew that her decision to breach alone would either vindicate her tactical judgment or end her career with this unit. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, barely contained anger, evident in every word. Control Alpha Team requests immediate extraction of our missing team member. Martinez violated direct orders and compromised team integrity. Morrison, maintain radio discipline. Reynolds responded sharply. All tactical decisions will be evaluated during the after-action review. One of the civilian actors, a retired police officer who frequently participated in these exercises, moved closer to Sarah. I've been playing hostages for 3 years, he said quietly. Usually takes the teams 45 minutes to an hour to reach us if they reach us at all. What you just did, that was something special. Sarah appreciated the sentiment, but she knew that tactical success and career advancement weren't always the same thing in military organizations. She had seen talented soldiers destroyed by politics, and brilliant tacticians sidelined for refusing to follow conventional thinking. Her breach had been tactically sound, but it had also been a direct violation of orders from multiple levels of command. Through her earpiece, she could hear the other teams coordinating their withdrawal from the building. Charlie team had successfully neutralized the defenders on the east side, but had taken casualties in the process. Bravo team's overwatch had been effective but hadn't been able to support the lobby assault due to limited angles of fire. The exercise had demonstrated the complexity of urban combat and the difficulty of coordinating multiple teams in confined spaces. Martinez, this is Control. Reynolds' voice cut through the radio chatter. Report to the command post immediately for debriefing. Local security will escort the hostages to the extraction point. Sarah knew this was the moment of truth. The tone in Reynolds' voice was carefully neutral, revealing nothing about whether her actions would be seen as heroic or insubordinate. She had bet her entire career on a 30-second breach, and now she would learn whether that bet had paid off. She made her way through the building, noting the positions where the other teams had engaged the defending actors. The lobby showed clear evidence of the prolonged firefight, with overturned furniture and scattered equipment marking the spots where Morrison's team had taken casualties. The mezzanine position that had caused so much trouble was now empty, its defenders having withdrawn when Sarah's breach eliminated their primary targets. The command post was a converted trailer filled with monitors, communications equipment, and several very serious-looking officers. Captain Reynolds stood at the center, studying video feeds from cameras positioned throughout the building. Every aspect of the exercise had been recorded for later analysis, including Sarah's unauthorized breach and the spectacular results that followed. Sit down, Martinez, Reynolds said without looking up from the monitors. His tone was still unreadable, the voice of a commander who had learned not to reveal his thoughts until he was ready to act on them. Sarah took the indicated chair and waited. Around her, the other evaluators continued their work, reviewing footage and comparing it to pre-established performance metrics. She could see herself on one of the monitors, moving through the utility corridors with a speed and confidence that looked almost supernatural when played back in real time. Explain your decision to abandon your assigned position, Reynolds said, finally turning to face her. His weathered features showed no emotion, but his eyes were intense with the focus of someone conducting a critical evaluation. Sir, the primary assault plan had a fatal flaw, Sarah responded. The lobby created a kill zone that would have resulted in unacceptable casualties in a real operation. When I identified an alternate route that could neutralize the threat without exposing the team to unnecessary risk, I took initiative to execute that option. You violated direct orders from your team leader and from this command. Yes, sir. I made a tactical decision that prioritized mission success over chain of command protocols. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. And if this had been a real operation? If those had been real hostages and real terrorists? Sarah met his gaze directly. Sir, in a real operation, 6 innocent people would be alive instead of dead. The mission would have been completed with minimal friendly casualties and maximum tactical advantage. The violation of protocols would be irrelevant compared to the lives saved. One of the other evaluators, a colonel Sarah didn't recognize, leaned forward in his chair. What you did was impressive, Martinez, but it was also incredibly risky. If you had been wrong about the building layout, or if there had been additional defenders in that room, you could have gotten yourself and the hostages killed. Yes, sir, Sarah acknowledged. But the intelligence was solid, my reconnaissance was thorough, and the tactical situation required immediate action. In my judgment, the risk of waiting for conventional support was greater than the risk of immediate intervention. The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of electronic equipment, Sarah could feel the weight of multiple evaluations being conducted simultaneously, not just of her tactical performance, but of her judgment, her character, and her fitness for the kind of operations this unit conducted. She had thrown away the safety of following orders in favor of the uncertainty of doing what she believed was right. Reynolds walked to a wall-mounted display showing the building's floor plan. Red markers indicated the positions of all friendly forces at the moment Sarah had initiated her breach. Blue markers showed the locations of hostile actors. The tactical picture was clear. Sarah had been the only operator in position to prevent the simulated execution of the hostages. "Your team leader has requested that you be removed from the program," Reynolds said without turning around. "He believes that your inability to follow orders makes you unsuitable for team operations." Sarah felt her heart sink, but she kept her expression neutral. She had known this was a possibility, had accepted the risk when she made the decision to breach. "I understand, sir." However, Reynolds continued, the mission was successfully completed with 0 friendly casualties and minimal collateral damage. The hostages were rescued in record time, and the building was cleared with a level of efficiency that exceeded all previous exercises. He turned back to face her, and for the first time Sarah thought she detected something that might have been approval in his expression. "Your tactical innovation saved the mission, Martinez. Your willingness to accept responsibility for your actions demonstrates the kind of leadership we need in this unit. Your execution was flawless under extreme pressure." The colonel leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We've been running these exercises for 8 years. Nobody has ever completed the hostage rescue scenario in under an hour. You did it in 30 seconds. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but she forced herself to remain cautious. Military evaluations could change direction without warning, and she wasn't ready to celebrate until she heard the final verdict. "What happens now, sir?" Reynolds returned to his position at the center of the command post. "Now we review the footage with your team and discuss whether tactical innovation or chain of command takes priority in this unit. The decision will ultimately determine not just your future here, but the future direction of our entire operational philosophy." Through the window, Sarah could see Morrison and the other SEALs gathered around their equipment, their body language suggesting heated discussion about the morning's events. She knew that the next few hours would determine whether she had earned their respect or confirmed their worst assumptions about her capabilities. The after-action review was held in the base's main briefing room, a sterile space with white walls and fluorescent lighting that seemed designed to eliminate any hint of comfort or casualness. Sarah sat at a metal table facing a panel of evaluators, while the other candidates filled rows of chairs behind her. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Morrison sat 3 seats away from Sarah, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke volumes about his feelings regarding the morning's events. Richards and Thompson flanked him, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. The other SEAL teams were scattered throughout the room, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of background noise that Captain Reynolds silenced with a single raised hand. "This morning's, exercise revealed significant gaps in our standard operating procedures," Reynolds began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "It also demonstrated the difference between following protocols and achieving mission success. We're here to discuss that difference and its implications for future operations." A large screen at the front of the room flickered to life, showing aerial footage of the training building. Red lines traced the movement of each team, clearly illustrating how Morrison's team had become trapped in the lobby, while Sarah's alternate route had bypassed all defensive positions. The tactical picture was undeniable. Conventional approaches had failed while innovation had succeeded. "Chief Morrison, explain your team's performance," Reynolds commanded. Morrison stood at attention, his posture rigid with military bearing. "Sir, Alpha Team executed a textbook assault on a fortified position. We encountered heavier resistance than anticipated, which slowed our advance, but we maintained unit cohesion and followed established protocols throughout the engagement. And yet you failed to rescue a single hostage." The Colonel Sarah didn't recognize observed. "In fact, your team suffered 60% casualties before the exercise was terminated. In a real operation, your entire unit would have been wiped out." "Sir, the exercise parameters were designed to test our ability to adapt under pressure," Morrison replied. We were adapting to changing circumstances when Martinez violated orders and compromised our tactical coordination. Reynolds activated a control that showed video footage from inside the building. Sarah watched herself moving through the utility corridors with smooth efficiency, her small frame allowing her to navigate spaces that would have been impossible for larger operators. The footage was damning evidence that conventional thinking had been inadequate for the situation. "Martinez, explain your decision-making process," Reynolds said. Sarah stood, her mind racing through the critical moments when she had chosen to abandon her assigned position. "Sir, the primary assault plan created a fatal funnel in the lobby area. Intelligence indicated that the defenders had established overlapping fields of fire from the mezzanine level. Continuing with the original plan would have resulted in unacceptable casualties without achieving mission objectives. So you decided to ignore your team leader's orders and operate independently?" "Sir, I identified an alternate route that offered tactical advantage with minimal risk exposure. When the situation became critical and hostage elimination appeared imminent, I made the decision to act on available intelligence rather than wait for conventional support that might arrive too late." The room erupted in murmured conversations as the other candidates discussed the implications of Sarah's statement. Several of the Army Rangers and Marine Force recon operators nodded in agreement, while the SEALs maintained their skeptical expressions. The divide was clear: those who had worked in environments requiring individual initiative versus those who prioritized unit cohesion above all else. Reynolds held up his hand for silence. "The video evidence shows that Martinez completed the hostage rescue in under 30 seconds with 0 friendly casualties. Her tactical innovation achieved mission success where conventional approaches failed. However, she also violated direct orders from multiple levels of command." One of the SEAL candidates raised his hand. "Sir, what happens in the field when someone decides that their judgment is more important than team coordination? How do we maintain unit integrity if everyone starts making independent decisions?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the eyes of every person in the room focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond to what was essentially an attack on her fitness for team operations. She had faced this criticism throughout her military career, the assumption that independent thinking somehow equated to an inability to work with others. "Permission to respond, sir?" Sarah asked. Reynolds nodded. "Go ahead, Martinez." Sarah turned to face the SEAL who had asked the question. "In Afghanistan, I was part of a joint task force conducting night raids on high-value targets. One night, our team leader ordered us to breach a compound through the front gate following standard protocol. But I had been watching the target for 3 days and I knew that approach would get us all killed." The room was completely silent now, every person focused on Sarah's words. Even Morrison had stopped scowling and was listening intently to her story. "I suggested an alternate route through a drainage culvert that connected to the compound's back courtyard. My team leader refused to deviate from the planned approach, so I made a choice: follow orders and watch my teammates die, or take initiative and give us all a chance to survive." Sarah paused, letting the weight of that choice settle over the room. "I took 3 volunteers and used the drainage route while the main team executed the frontal assault. When the defenders opened fire on the front gate, we were already inside the compound moving toward the target building. We neutralized 6 enemy fighters and secured the high-value target before the main team even reached the courtyard." The SEAL who had asked the question was leaning forward now, his skepticism replaced by genuine interest. "What happened to your team leader?" "He put me in for a Bronze Star," Sarah replied, "because he understood that mission success sometimes requires tactical adaptation, even when it means deviating from established protocols. The enemy doesn't follow our playbook, so we can't be slaves to it either." Colonel Mitchell, whom Sarah now recognized as the unit's deputy commander, stood and walked to the front of the room. "The question before us today is whether this unit will prioritize rigid adherence to protocols or adaptive tactical thinking. Both approaches have merit, but they represent fundamentally different philosophies of warfare." He activated another display showing casualty statistics from recent special operations missions. "Conventional assault techniques have a 68% success rate in hostage rescue scenarios. However, they also result in an average of 40% friendly casualties and 23% hostage casualties. These numbers are unacceptable in an era where precision and speed are paramount." Morrison finally spoke up, his voice tight with frustration. Sir, those statistics don't account for the importance of unit cohesion and tactical coordination. When team members start operating independently, communication breaks down, friendly fire incidents increase, and overall mission effectiveness decreases. Chief Morrison raises valid concerns, Reynolds acknowledged. But the footage from this morning's exercise tells a different story. Martinez maintained constant communication with the command center, provided regular situation reports, and coordinated her actions with the overall tactical picture. She didn't abandon teamwork. She redefined it. The debate continued for another hour, with candidates and evaluators arguing the merits of different tactical approaches. Some insisted that military discipline required absolute adherence to orders, regardless of circumstances. Others argued that battlefield conditions demanded flexibility and individual initiative. Sarah found herself at the center of a philosophical divide that had been brewing in special operations communities for years. Finally, Reynolds called for silence. "We've heard enough discussion. It's time for a decision." He turned to face Sarah directly. "Martinez, your tactical performance this morning was exceptional. Your breach technique was flawless, your situational awareness was outstanding, and your results speak for themselves." Sarah felt her heart racing as she waited for the inevitable but that would end her chances with the unit. "However," Reynolds continued, and Sarah's stomach dropped, "your willingness to violate direct orders raises serious questions about your fitness for team operations. This unit requires operators who can think independently, but also function as part of a coordinated team." The room was completely silent now, every person waiting to hear whether Sarah would be dismissed from the program or given another chance to prove herself. She had gambled everything on 30 seconds of tactical action, and now she would learn whether that gamble had paid off. After extensive discussion with the evaluation board, Reynolds said, "We have reached a unanimous decision regarding your future with this unit." Sarah braced herself for disappointment, already planning her next career move and wondering if any other special operations unit would take a chance on someone who had been dismissed from the most elite counter-terrorism program in the country. "Congratulations, Martinez," Reynolds said with the hint of a smile. "Welcome to the unit. Your tactical innovation and battlefield adaptability are exactly what we need for the challenges we face in modern warfare." The room erupted in a mixture of cheers and stunned silence. Some of the candidates applauded enthusiastically while others sat in shocked disbelief. Morrison's expression was unreadable, but Sarah thought she detected a grudging respect in his eyes. "However," Reynolds continued, raising his voice over the noise, "your integration into this unit will require some adjustments on everyone's part. Morrison, you and Martinez will be working closely together to develop new tactical protocols that incorporate both conventional teamwork and adaptive individual initiative." Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with anticipation. She had not only survived the selection process, but had potentially changed the entire unit's approach to operations. The real test would come in the months ahead, as she worked to prove that tactical innovation and team coordination weren't mutually exclusive. 3 months later, Sarah found herself in a very different kind of briefing room. Gone were the sterile white walls and fluorescent lighting of the training facility. This room was located in a classified facility outside Washington, D.C., its windows tinted black and its walls lined with sophisticated electronic equipment that hummed quietly in the background. The mission briefing she was about to receive would test everything she had learned about balancing individual initiative with team coordination. The integration process had been challenging but ultimately successful. Morrison had initially resisted working with Sarah, his skepticism evident in every training exercise and tactical discussion. But gradually, as they developed new protocols that incorporated both conventional teamwork and adaptive individual initiative, a grudging respect had emerged between them. Sarah's tactical innovations had improved the unit's effectiveness, while Morrison's emphasis on coordination had helped her understand the importance of seamless team integration. "Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Nightfall," Colonel Mitchell announced as he activated the main display screen. The image showed a 3-story warehouse complex in Eastern Europe, surrounded by industrial buildings and accessed by a network of narrow streets that would complicate any rescue attempt. Sarah studied the layout carefully, her mind automatically identifying potential entry points, defensive positions, and escape routes. Beside her, Morrison was doing the same thing, his years of experience allowing him to spot tactical challenges that wouldn't be obvious to less experienced operators. The past 3 months had taught them to combine their different perspectives into a more complete tactical picture. Intelligence indicates that 3 American journalists have been held in this facility for the past 2 weeks, Mitchell continued. The hostage-takers are a terrorist cell with connections to international arms dealers. They've demanded the release of several high-profile prisoners in exchange for the journalists' lives. The mission parameters were disturbingly familiar to the training exercise that had launched Sarah's career with the unit. But this time the stakes were real. Real hostages, real terrorists, real consequences for failure. The tactical challenges were also more complex, with multiple buildings, unknown numbers of defenders, and the added complication of operating in a foreign country where backup would be limited. Team Alpha will consist of Martinez, Morrison, Richards, and Thompson, Mitchell announced. You'll be responsible for the primary assault on the main building, where the hostages are believed to be held. Team Bravo will provide overwatch and handle any external security forces. Team Charlie will secure the perimeter and prevent escape attempts. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as she realized she would be working directly with the same SEALs who had once dismissed her as a liability. The irony wasn't lost on her that the men who had questioned her fitness for team operations were now depending on her tactical innovations to complete their most critical mission to date. Rules of engagement are weapons tight, Mitchell continued. These terrorists have already executed 2 hostages in previous operations, so we can assume they won't hesitate to kill the journalists if they feel threatened. Speed and precision are absolutely critical. Morrison leaned over to Sarah and spoke quietly. This is exactly the kind of situation where your breach techniques could make the difference. But we need to coordinate with the other teams to make sure we don't compromise their positions. It was a remarkable change from the man who had once insisted that tactical innovation was incompatible with team operations. The past 3 months had taught Morrison that Sarah's independent thinking wasn't a threat to unit cohesion, but rather an enhancement to their overall capabilities. Her willingness to adapt and take calculated risks complemented his emphasis on coordination and systematic planning. Intelligence suggests the terrorists have established defensive positions on all 3 floors, Mitchell said, highlighting different areas of the building on the tactical display. They've also rigged the building with explosive devices that could be detonated if they feel the situation is hopeless. This adds another layer of complexity to an already challenging operation. Sarah studied the building's architectural features, noting the placement of windows, doors, and potential structural weaknesses. Her experience with unconventional entry routes had taught her to look for opportunities that wouldn't be obvious to conventional tactical thinking. The building's loading dock area caught her attention, particularly the series of ventilation shafts that connected to the main HVAC system. Sir, do we have blueprints showing the building's mechanical systems? Sarah asked. Mitchell activated another display showing detailed schematics of the warehouse's internal structure. The building was constructed in the 1960s as a textile factory. The HVAC system is extensive but outdated, with large ductwork that might support human movement. Morrison studied the mechanical drawings with renewed interest. Over the past 3 months, he had learned to appreciate Sarah's ability to identify tactical opportunities in unexpected places. Her success in the training exercise had come from exactly this kind of creative thinking, and he was beginning to understand how it could be integrated with conventional assault techniques. If we could access the HVAC system through the loading dock, Sarah said, we might be able to reach the hostage location without triggering the building's defensive network. It would require careful coordination with the external teams to ensure we don't compromise their positions. Richards, who had initially been one of Sarah's harshest critics, nodded in agreement. The approach would be completely unexpected. Even if they have the main entrances covered, they probably haven't considered the possibility of infiltration through the mechanical systems. Thompson pulled up additional intelligence reports on his tablet. Thermal imaging shows heat signatures on all 3 floors, but the highest concentration is on the 2nd floor, in what appears to be a large open area. That's probably where they're holding the hostages. Sarah felt the familiar mental shift that occurred when tactical planning moved from theoretical to operational. Every detail became critical. Every decision could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. But this time, instead of operating alone, she was part of a coordinated team that valued both innovation and systematic execution. Time is a critical factor, Mitchell announced. Intelligence indicates the terrorists are planning to move the hostages to a secondary location within the next 12 hours. If we lose track of them, recovery becomes exponentially more difficult. The briefing continued for another hour, covering everything from communication protocols to medical evacuation procedures. Sarah found herself contributing tactical insights while Morrison handled coordination details, their different strengths complementing each other in ways that made the entire team more effective. The integration process that had seemed impossible 3 months ago was now producing results that exceeded what either of them could have achieved alone. As the briefing concluded and the teams began their final preparations, Sarah realized that her unauthorized breach in the training exercise had accomplished more than just rescuing simulated hostages. It had forced an entire elite unit to reconsider their assumptions about tactical doctrine, team coordination, and the balance between following orders and achieving mission success. The real test would come in the next few hours, when theory would be replaced by reality, and tactical innovation would be measured against life and death consequences. The warehouse district was shrouded in pre-dawn darkness as Alpha Team approached their target. Sarah moved through the shadows with practiced silence, her smaller frame allowing her to navigate between shipping containers and industrial equipment, without creating the noise signatures that might alert perimeter guards. Behind her, Morrison, Richards, and Thompson followed in perfect formation, their movements coordinated through months of intensive training that had transformed 4 individual operators into a seamless tactical unit. The past 3 months had fundamentally changed their relationship. What had begun as skepticism and resistance had evolved into mutual respect and tactical synergy. Morrison had learned to value Sarah's innovative thinking, while Sarah had gained appreciation for the systematic coordination that made complex operations possible. Together they had developed techniques that neither could have achieved alone. Alpha Team in position, Morrison whispered into his microphone as they reached the loading dock area. Beginning infiltration sequence. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear the status reports from the other teams. Bravo Team had established overwatch positions in adjacent buildings, their sniper systems trained on every visible window and exit point. Charlie Team had quietly eliminated 2 perimeter guards and was now controlling access roads to prevent escape or reinforcement. The operation was proceeding with the precision that had made this unit legendary in counter-terrorism circles. Sarah examined the ventilation intake she had identified during the mission briefing. The opening was larger than expected, easily wide enough to accommodate human movement. More importantly, thermal imaging had confirmed that the ductwork led directly to the second-floor area where the hostages were being held. It was exactly the kind of unconventional approach that had become her signature, refined through months of training with teammates who now understood its tactical value. Ductwork is accessible, Sarah reported quietly. I can reach the hostage area without triggering perimeter defenses. Estimated time to target 8 minutes. Copy that, Morrison replied. We'll maintain position here and provide backup if the situation goes sideways. Remember, communication every 90 seconds. The coordination was seamless, born from countless hours of training exercises where they had learned to balance individual initiative with team support. Sarah's solo infiltration wasn't a violation of team protocols, but rather a tactical option that maximized their chances of success while minimizing risk to the hostages. Sarah slipped into the ventilation system, her movements guided by memorized building schematics and enhanced by thermal imaging equipment that allowed her to track heat signatures through the metal ductwork. The confined space that would have challenged larger operators provided her with concealed movement to within meters of the terrorist positions. As she moved through the building's mechanical systems, Sarah could hear fragments of conversation from the floors below. The terrorists were speaking in accented English, discussing plans to move the hostages to what they called the alternate location. Time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated, and the window for successful rescue was closing rapidly. Alpha 2 to Alpha Lead, Sarah whispered into her microphone. Hostiles are discussing imminent relocation. We need to accelerate the timeline. Copy Alpha 2, what's your assessment? Sarah reached a junction in the ductwork that provided direct access to the second-floor hostage area. Through a ventilation grate, She could see 3 armed men guarding what appeared to be a makeshift prison constructed from shipping containers. The 3 American journalists sat against one wall, their hands bound but apparently unharmed. The tactical picture was clear but challenging. Close quarters, multiple hostiles, civilian safety paramount. "I have eyes on 3 hostages and 3 hostiles in close proximity," Sarah reported. "Simultaneous neutralization required to prevent civilian casualties. Request permission to breach. Alpha 2, wait for team support," Morrison responded immediately. "Do not initiate contact alone." But Sarah could see what Morrison couldn't. One of the terrorists was speaking rapidly into a radio while checking his watch repeatedly. The body language was unmistakable. They were preparing to move the hostages immediately, possibly to kill them if the situation became untenable. Every second of delay increased the probability of mission failure and civilian casualties. "Alpha Lead, hostiles are preparing to execute contingency protocols," Sarah reported. "I have clean shots on all 3 targets. Hostages are positioned away from immediate threat axis." The next few seconds stretched into eternity as Sarah waited for Morrison's response. She could hear urgent conversations through her earpiece as the team leader processed her tactical assessment and weighed the risks of immediate action versus waiting for coordinated support. It was the same decision point that had defined her selection exercise 3 months ago, but this time the stakes were measured in real lives rather than training scores. "Alpha 2, you are cleared to engage." Morrison's voice carried absolute authority. "Execute on your command. Team support will be immediate." Sarah positioned herself at the ventilation grate, her weapon already trained on the first target. The breach sequence she was about to execute had been refined through months of practice, incorporating lessons learned from her unauthorized action during selection. But this time, instead of operating in isolation, she was supported by a coordinated team that understood her capabilities and could adapt to changing circumstances. She removed the ventilation grate with practiced silence and dropped into the hostage area in one fluid motion. Her first shot caught the nearest terrorist before he could react, the suppressed weapon making barely more noise than a loud cough. The second terrorist was turning toward the sound when Sarah's next round found its mark. The third terrorist had time to raise his weapon but not to fire before Sarah's final shot ended the threat. "Room clear," Sarah announced as she moved to check on the hostages. 3 hostiles neutralized, 3 friendlies secure and unharmed. "Outstanding work, Alpha 2. Morrison's voice carried genuine admiration. "Alpha Team moving to your position for extraction." The rescue of the 3 journalists was completed without further incident, but the real victory was larger than the success of a single mission. Sarah had proven that tactical innovation and team coordination weren't mutually exclusive concepts but rather complementary approaches that enhanced overall unit effectiveness. The same independent thinking that had once been seen as a liability had become the foundation for new, operational techniques that improved outcomes while maintaining the discipline and coordination that special operations demanded. As they prepared to extract the rescued journalists, Morrison approached Sarah with an expression she had never seen before. Gone was the skepticism and resistance that had characterized their early interactions. In its place was the respect of one professional acknowledging another's exceptional performance under the most demanding circumstances. "That was textbook execution," Morrison said quietly. "But more than that, it was exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that separates elite operators from conventional soldiers. You've changed how this unit approaches complex problems, and you've made all of us better at our jobs." The extraction proceeded smoothly, with all teams coordinating their withdrawal to ensure the journalists reached safety without further incident. But for Sarah, the real achievement wasn't the successful completion of another mission. It was the transformation of professional relationships that had seemed impossible just months earlier, and the integration of different tactical philosophies into something more effective than either approach could have achieved alone. 6 months later, Sarah was leading her own team, training new operators in techniques that balanced individual initiative with team coordination. The unauthorized breach that had nearly ended her career had instead revolutionized an entire unit's approach to special operations. More importantly, it had proven that exceptional performance could overcome institutional prejudice, and that tactical innovation was essential for meeting the evolving challenges of modern warfare. The warehouse district where she had rescued 3 American journalists was now just another mission in a growing list of successful operations. But for Sarah Martinez, it represented something more significant. The moment when her tactical vision became accepted doctrine, and when her individual capabilities were fully integrated with team objectives to create something neither could have achieved alone.